What is up guys, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can make a fully functioning quiz application. By the end of the video, you'll be able to authenticate your users, be able to take quizzes, and create new questions for other users. Now this is the biggest crash course I have done on the channel. And the reason behind this is that I have a sponsor. Now this sponsor is Nhost.io, and they can bring you a complete backend in seconds. I'm talking Postgres, Hasura, GraphQL, authentication, storage, and serverless functions at a click of a button. Now if that sounds like something that you're interested in, make sure to check the description. But for now, let's get coding. So here we are in Nhost's new project section of the console. Now, the way to get here is to click onto the dashboard and log in, and then hit create project. So we're going to call this one quiz crash course. And as you can see, the new name gets placed in the project URL. We're going to use this 14-day free trial. And as you can see, for just $4 a month, you can have authentication, database, and storage on your projects. So we're going to do United States as that's our closest location, and New York is closer than San Francisco for me. And let's go ahead and hit create project. It's then going to ask and tell you, a quick quiz about what you're doing. So I'm planning to build a side project using NextJs. And where did you hear about us? And you can just select other. And then once this is fully finished creating all of the pieces, we'll get back and I'll show you how to set up authentication. Okay, so here we are in our quiz crash course dashboard. Now in here, you can access a lot of different things. First, here are our two endpoints, one for our GraphQL and one for the backend, which is used for Auth and for storage. So when you use these in your application, we're going to put these as environmentals so that we can access the correct piece as we go along. So the most important thing for us first is to set up authentication in our application. So by the end of this, we're going to create this fantastic quiz, but we also need the user to log in so that they can create new questions and answer all the questions that other people have used. So to set up authentication, it's really simple, and Nhost has done a lot of the work for us. So under the settings section, you're going to see something here called the sign-in methods and also authentication. So in the sign-in methods, to be able to use auth providers such as GitHub, Google, and Facebook, we need to have a redirect URL. So for us, we're just going to use localhost 3000 because that is our endpoint for our NextJS application. And then just go ahead and hit save. Then what you'll see is that now you have the options to add Google here, GitHub, and Facebook. And they'll obviously be adding more OAuth providers as time goes on. So we're going to set up GitHub because it's the easiest one to get started with. So let's add GitHub to our application, and then we can move on and show you how to use Auth with Nhost in Next.js. So the first thing you're going to do is click enable here, and you're going to click this and it will copy back the callback URI. Then I'm going to meet you over at the OAuth section of GitHub to show you how to set up an OAuth application. So in GitHub, the way that you do this is you go to settings and then to your developer settings, select OAuth apps, and then hit new OAuth apps. Then give yourself a name, so we'll call it quiz crash course. Give it a URL such as localhost 3000, and then the authorization callback URL is the one that I clicked on the screen. So we just copy and paste this in, and this will provide the ability for us to actually get the callback into our application routed through Nhost. And then all you do is click register application, and it's going to give you two things here, a client ID, and then you need to generate a new client secret. So go ahead and do that, and then we can meet back on the other side in the Nhost dashboard. So back in the Nhost dashboard, and I've copied my client ID and secret, and then all you need to do is hit save. So at that point, our authentication is ready to go. We can use email and password because that's enabled by default. We can now use GitHub as well as another option. One more thing you might want to do with your applications here is underneath the verification, you can actually set haveibeenpwned.com, and all passwords must pass this option here. So if you've never seen this before, we'll just go ahead and open it up. Basically, it will make sure that a password is good news, no ponies found. So basically, it makes sure that the password has never been breached before, and this might be an option for you. So for this, we're going to leave it off, but just bear in mind this is an option, and it's very useful if you're using emails and passwords. So now we've done that, we've set up authentication, our application is up and ready to go. Let's go into our NextJS application, get it set up, and use the Auth for the first time. So here we are in a basic NextJS application that has no code at all. So what I've done is create a folder here called components, and the rest is just the standard Next.js. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install all of the important pieces that we need to make this quiz application work and use all of the Nhost features. So to begin with, let's install the Nhost features. So first we're going to need React Apollo and also Nhost/React Auth. And of course, one more, Nhost.js SDK. So once we've installed these, I'll come back and we can install the other important pieces such as GraphQL, etc. So next on the list of things that we're going to need GraphQL, and we're also going to need Apollo. So let's do a npm install at Apollo/client, and we're also going to need GraphQL. And that is the basics that we're going to need to be able to handle the authentication, database updates, and GraphQL queries that we're going to run. So once these have installed, we can talk about what I'm going to install to handle the rest of the application. So for this application, I'm going to use ChakraUI as my preferred framework for CSS. Now, obviously, if you prefer Tailwind or straight vanilla CSS, you can skip this step. But bear in mind, the whole crash course is going to be based around using ChakraUI to create a nice looking UI. So next on the list, ChakraUI. So to do that, I'm just going to copy and paste it in, and I'll leave a link in the description of the ChakraUI command for installing. And once it's installed, I'll meet you back and we can start creating our utils for APIs and Nhost. Okay, with everything installed, including ChakraUI, you should have a dependency list that looks like this. Apollo client, ChakraUI React, emotion styled, Nhost React Apollo, React Auth, frame emotion, GraphQL next, obviously, and Nhost.js.sdk, and React icons. So if you have all of those things ready, what we can do now is start creating the framework for our whole application. So to begin with, let's create a new folder here called utils. And we'll also create a new file on the root directory where we can do some configuration to make it easier for us to be able to reference things as components and in our utils. But first, let's create a new file in here called nhost.js. Now this nhost.js is going to handle the initialization of both authentication and the use of storage with Nhost. The way that this works essentially is we send in the base URL for our platform and then we initialize the application. Important about this is that we need a .env file to take care of everything. So the way that env files work in Next, if you haven't dealt with client-side code and you've only been using your environments on the server side, what you need to do is you need to include next public and then the key that you want. So it looks something like this: next public underscore key equals, and then your key. So what we'll do here is we'll do next public nhost underscore backend, and then we'll do next public nhost GraphQL. So now we have a backend one and also a GraphQL one. So we need to just jump back into nhost and grab those two things which are on the dashboard as you log in. And once you've done that, I'll meet you back here. Okay, so now we have these .env files ready to go with both our backend and GraphQL URL. We can start creating something for nhost. So what we can do is import nhost from nhost-js SDK, and then we can configure here. So we just do configure equals, and then base underscore URL, and then we can just set this to process.env. And then for this one, we're going to use this public nhost backend. And then we can hit save here. And then underneath, we can just ask it to initialize the app by using the configuration that we have above. And then from there, we can essentially just create the auth part of the application and the storage part. And then say export auth and storage. So at this point, we're basically ready to use nhost in any way that we feel is appropriate. So now that we have this, what I want to do is make some changes to our app.js file so that we can use both the authentication parts, the GraphQL through Apollo through nhost, as well as ChakraUI for our provider for the frameworks. So inside of your app.js, you're going to need to import a few things. So the first thing that we're going to import is ChakraUI, and that one is just Chakra Provider, and that comes from ChakraReact. And then underneath, we're going to import both nhost auth provider, and that's going to come from nhost react auth. And then we need to also import nhost Apollo provider, and that's going to come from the nhost react Apollo. Then that newly created file we have here, we actually need to use. But before we import this, what we should do is create a JS config file here in this JSON to handle both our components folder and our utils folder. Now, once we get into this, I'll explain how these work. So essentially, this is a JSON file that allows you to both set some sort of variables here that you can use so that you don't have to keep doing ... components or ... environments or ... whatever. So the way this works is you just type the word compiler options, and then inside of here, you can set your base URL. And for this, it's just a period. And then inside of here, we can set our paths. And inside of this path, we're going to do @/components/*. And then we're going to set that to a new array. And then inside of here, we're just going to do components/*. So basically, it's going to look for anything in this file here. We can just reference now using this anywhere in our application. It doesn't matter how deep in the tree you go, you can always get to the component. And while we're here, I'm going to create one more. I'm going to call this @/utils. And this is going to be a way of us being able to get to the utils folder. In case we need to use it somewhere else and we don't have to keep typing ... we can just type @ and then /. So now we have that. We can come into our app here and just do import. And then we can import this file here. More importantly, just the auth part, because that's all we're going to need. And we can go from, and then you can now see that we have this option here, utils, so we can just select that and then just do Nhost. So now we have everything here. What we can do is start using these features as a way of being able to now add providers for both the Auth and Apollo. So what we can do here is just cut this out here and just drop it down here. And then inside of our return, we're going to do a few things. So first, we want to wrap everything in our Auth provider by providing in the Auth. And just like that, now we have Auth anywhere in our application. And then what we can do here is also do our Apollo provider in the same fashion. So we can pass in Auth to it so that it can understand if the user is available. And then we can do something like this. So now what we're saying essentially is we want to be able to have an endpoint that we can always hit. So as you can see from here, we actually imported this here. So what we can do is just do a process.env.nextPublic nhost GraphQL, and that will give us the endpoint anywhere in our application. Then inside of here, I'm going to just do the Chakra provider. And then what we can do is take this and just drop it in here. And now we have everything available for us to be able to use this application however we feel. So now that we have the basics set up, let's actually start creating some pages that we can use. So the first pages that we're going to create for this application is going to be the sign up and also the login page. And they're going to be fairly similar. So we're going to create the sign up page and we're just going to copy and paste that and then just make a couple changes to make the login page work. But before we do any of that, what I want to do is create a container here that's going to handle essentially the layout of our application and the ability to change between both, is the user logged in or are they not? So we can create a component here called container component. And inside of here is where we're going to do a bit of work. So we need to import React from React. We're just going to import NextLink from next/link. And then we're going to import a couple of ChakraUI pieces here. So we're going to need a button, we're going to need flex, and we're going to need a box. Now, obviously, if you're using something else, you just need to be able to create a flex, box, and button. We're also going to make a styled component here, which I'm using emotion style for. And we're also going to import both use Auth from our Nhost React Auth. And we're also going to import the Auth from our utils here, because what I want to add as a feature in the future is the ability to log out from here. So first, let's create a sticky nav. And this sticky nav is going to be a styled flexed that I'm going to use to basically create a sticky nav and then be able to extend that out to do some other things. So in here, we're going to have a position of sticky. We're going to have a z index of 10 so that it's on the top. We'll have a top 0, and then we'll do backdrop dash filter. And then we're going to saturate that at 180%, and then we're going to add a blur here of 20%. Actually, we'll do 20 pixels. And this will allow us to basically blur out as we scroll down the screen if we need to. And then the final piece of the puzzle is the transition, which we'll just set background dash color. We'll do 0.1 and we'll do ease in and out. So now we have a sticky nav here. What we can do is essentially create our container by using the export default function container, and we're going to pass in the children. And the children in this case are going to be any of our items. So if you go to the login page, that would be the child, or the sign up page would also be the child. So we're going to pass in everything into this. So what we can do here is do a const, and this is a feature of the React Auth. We can ask whether or not they're signed in. So we can just do signed in, and we can say use auth. And this basically means we can ask whether or not they are signed in, and if they are signed in, it will return true, and if they're not, it will return false. So it's as simple as that to check whether or not a user is actually logged in or not. So what we can do now is do a return here, and then we can actually start creating our container. So what we'll do is we'll add a box, and we'll just set the height to 100 and the width to 100 as well. Then what we can do is use the sticky nav that we've created here and pass in some extra features. So we can do sticky nav and then do flex direction on this sticky nav and say we want row. We can set the max width here equal to 1200 pixels, and then we can do a width equal to 100%. Then as equals nav, so that we know it's the navigation bar. Then we're going to add some padding. So we're going to add some padding around the whole thing of 8. Then we're going to add a margin at the top. Now the margin at the top is going to be 0 and 8. So this means on a small screen, there'll be no margin. And on anything bigger than a small screen, we'll set it to the 8 value. And on the margin at the bottom, we'll always set to 8. And then we'll do mx equals auto. So now we have this. Inside of our sticky nav is where we're going to do a couple of conditional renderings. So the first condition is going to be if they're not signed in, then we can return whatever we need to. So in this case, we're going to return equal to the set of links to have them log in. So we can just do a box here. And inside of this box, we can say next link. And we'll set the href to just the home page. And we'll add a button here. And we'll make it an A link, so it's actually an A. And we'll set the variant equal to ghost. Now, ghost in ChakraUI, if you've never used it, makes the button invisible. So it just looks like some text. And then we can just do 1 and a 4. So on a small screen, it'll only have 1 padding, and on a large screen, it will have 4. And I believe that is a rem at 4. So now we have 1. We can just take this and copy and paste it down. So we need 3 buttons total. And this one is going to be login. And we'll call this /login. And then this one will be the sign up page. And we'll do /signup. And then we need to do the opposite of this. So if they're not signed in, so essentially what we can do is take this and copy it from here and paste it down here and say if they are signed in, instead of going to the login page, we can go to our create page, which we don't have, but that will be where we can create a question. And here is where we can take a quiz. And that will go to quiz. And then we can hit save. So now we have a navigation already built into the application and will work as we build upon the platform. So now underneath that sticky nav, we can create a flex here that's going to take care of everything else that's passed along with it. So we can just say flex direction is column. We can say align content equal to center. We can justify content equal to center. We can add a width here of say 75%, and we'll use mx equals auto. And we'll set the height equal to 70 of the viewport that they're in. And then we can close out this flex tag, and inside of here we can just do children. And that will just display the children, which could be the login page, the sign up page, the app page, or wherever we're at. So now this is fully created, what we can start on now is the sign up page. So we're going to move over there and start creating everything we need to have a user sign in. So the way the sign up page is going to work is we're going to have the ability to both use the GitHub that we set up originally, and also the ability to use the email as well as a display name. We also should be allowed to, when we create a user, if they suddenly decide they're going to log in with GitHub for some reason, we shouldn't error out and we should just merge them together so they have the ability to use both. So let's import a few things. First, we need useState and React. We're also going to use the router from NextRouter. And then we're also going to use the auth that we created in the utils folder, which we should be able to just do @/utils and then nhost. Then we're just going to need to import some stuff for ChakraUI. If you're not using it, you can skip ahead about 20 seconds. So we're going to need a text box, a stack. We're going to use inputs. We're going to use button. We're going to use center. We're going to use heading. I'm going to use box. And that's coming from ChakraUI React. And then we're also going to need some icons so that we can have the social logins have icons and look really nice. So we're going to do FA Google, FA Facebook, and FA GitHub. Now, obviously, only one of these buttons is going to work in our quiz application, but you could obviously extend this out and add the additional providers without much effort. And those come from React icon/FA. Then we can import our new container from components. And we can do that by using the @/components and then container component. And now we are ready to create our function. So we're going to do an export default function here. And then we can just do sign up as the option here. And then we can open and close as some curly braces. So for the use state, we're going to need a couple of things here. We're going to need the email, the password, and the display name that we want to keep track of. So let's create those. So you're just going to do const and then display name and then set display name. I'm going to set that to use state, and it's just going to be an empty string. Then you can take this one, we can just copy, paste it 3 times, and set this to email and set email. And then we'll set this to password and set password. So now we have all of the abilities to track our user as they enter into their forms. Then we're going to need the router, and to initialize that, you just do use router, and that's it. Then I'm going to create a function here, and it's just going to be called handle submit, and we'll set an E here. And inside of here is where we'll do our way to authenticate a registration for an email and password. But for now, we can just leave it blank. So now we have that, we can create our return here. So the way that our return is going to work is essentially we're going to use our container that we created previously, and then use that container to both handle the form inputs as well as the ability to use our socials. So what we can do is create a heading here, and the heading is going to come from ChakraUI, and we're just going to make it an H1, and we'll just set it into the center of the screen. And we can just call this register. Then we can create a center here, and this will put it in the middle of the screen, and this is why I've imported it. And it will be in the middle of the parent above it. And then we can create our form here and say form on submit. We can just say handle submit, which is this function that doesn't actually do anything right now. but that's okay. Then inside of that, we can do our input. So we can do input type equal text, and then we'll call this value equal to display name. And then on change, we expect this to change to the set display name. So we can do an E here, and then a set of arrows and say set display name, and then e.target.value. Then we can set a placeholder equal to just your name. And then we'll set this to autofocus. And then we'll do a margin at the top equal to either 2 on a small screen and 4 on a larger screen. And then we can close out our input here. So now when I've hit save, you can see in a nice format. And then we can just copy and paste this 2 more times and make a quick couple of edits here. So the top one here underneath that will be an email, and this is going to be set to email. And then we can set the target here, set email, and then the placeholder will be email. And then for this one, we can then set this to password. And we want the type to also be password, so we're not exposing the user's password. And then we can just set password. And then the placeholder, we can just say password. And at this point, the form is ready to go. Obviously, we just need to create a couple of buttons, one to handle a cancellation and one to handle the submission. So we do box auto width 100%. And then inside of this box, we can just do a button. We'll set the color scheme equal to green, and this will be our positive path. So we'll set the width equal to 45%, and we'll add a margin at the top equal to 2,4, and then ML equal to 4. And then this will be type equal to submit. And then what we can do now is just set this to sign up, and we can hit save, and then we can take this button again and we can just copy and paste it down below. And instead of having a type as this, what we can do is set it to as equals a, and then we can set the href equal back to the home page, and we can just say cancel, and then we'll change it from green to red. So now basically we have a fully functioning form that works. It's set from our onSubmit, doesn't do anything. And then we need to create our ability to use social media. So what we can do here is do a center, and then we can do a stack here. And what the stack does is line them up in a nice neat line. So we can do stack is in line, and then say margin on the left of just 4, margin on the top of 6, regardless of size, and we'll add some spacing to each element of 8, and we'll align that content into the center. So now we have that. Now we can just create a button for each of them. So we can just do button, and we'll add a label here, and we'll call this one equal to Google login. And then we can just add a left icon equal to the icons that we imported. So we can just do FA and then Google, and then we just close it out, and then we have a button that we can write the word Google for. So now we have that, we can actually just copy and paste this 3 times, and we can just say this one is GitHub, this one is Facebook, and then we can just set this to Facebook login, and this to FA Facebook, and this one to FA GitHub. So now we have all of the icons here. What we can do is now set up our GitHub to actually work correctly. So the way that this works is we're going to make this button an A link. So we're just going to add as equals A, and then we're going to set a href. Now the href right now we're just going to leave as an empty string, and we're going to hit save. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to import our env for the backend, which handles authentication at the top of this application with a little bit extra to make it work. So what we can do here is underneath this, we can do a const, and we'll call this GitHub login, and we'll just keep it equals. And then we can do some backticks here and do $process.env. And then we can just copy and make sure that we get the name right. So it's this one here, and we can drop that in. So now we have that, and then at the end we can just do /auth/providers/GitHub. And that's it. Now this now makes it functional. So we can just drop this into our GitHub login here as the href. And just like that, we now have the ability to use GitHub. So what we should do is finish our onSubmit to handle the user entering their username and password here. Because right now what's happening is the user is unable to actually submit their login. So inside of this handle submit, what we're going to do is first we're going to prevent default, because we don't want it to do anything normal. And then we're going to do a try here, and we're going to say await auth, which we imported. We're going to do dot, and then we're going to do register, and that's our ability to register. And we're going to do email, password. So now that gives us email and password functionality. And then inside of here, we're going to open up a set of parentheses and say inside of these curly braces, display underscore name, and then just display name. And then if something goes terribly wrong, which happens from time to time, we can catch the error and just say return, I guess an alert for now, registration failed. And then finally at the end, what we can do is do router.push, and then we can just send them back to the login screen. And now they'll be ready to log in once they've finished their registrations. So now everything is set up to go now, so we should go ahead, launch our application, test it out, and see where we're at. So I'll meet you on the other side. So here we are in our application, and as you can see at the top, we now have like a little navigation bar, and then we have our registration form, name, email, password. They can click sign up, or they can click this GitHub provider, as these two don't do anything. So let's try GitHub. So it's going to say authorize crash course quiz, and we need the email address as read only, and would you like to authorize this? So you click this button here, and immediately we get authorized, and we've now been pushed back to the localhost 3000, which is what we asked our application to do. Right now it says welcome to Next.js, but in the future they'll be able to select their login or take a quiz. So if we hop back over to our console here and we go to this Auth tab, you can now see that I have authenticated James Perkins at hey.com. I'm active, and my default role is a user. So what we can do now is we can actually test the sign up again, and let's try signing in with emails. So let's do James Perkins, and let's do a different email address for myself, and we'll make it a really complicated password and hit sign up. And as you can see, we have been redirected to the login page, which is what I expected to happen. And if you go to Nhost now, we have just the method is set to just an @ symbol, because we know this is just email. And here is the new email and default user role. So we know that the registration works. So now we can create the login page so that the user can log in as they see fit once they have signed up for our application. So let's minimize this screen, go back to the code, and start working on that. So we're back in our code, and I'm on the sign up page. So I'm just going to take this and drop it in our login page, and then just change a few things as the functionality is the same. So we'll just change this word to login. And at the top, all the imports are going to stay exactly the same. The only difference here is that we don't need this display name, so we can get rid of that as a state. And we can also make sure that we make a change here. So instead of auth.register, you're going to do auth.login. And all we're going to pass in this time is the email and password. So we can just do something like this. And then we'll catch an error and we'll just say login failed. And then for this, we're just going to set this back to the home screen for now. But in the future, we'll make it the quiz. So now we have that. We can change our heading and make that login. And then we're going to keep everything the same, except for we're going to remove out the set display. And then the other pieces of information here is going to stay the same. So we're still going to use this GitHub login. It's going to be exactly the same and nothing's going to change. So what will happen is if somebody does log in, they will just get the refresh token and it will work as expected. Now, one thing I think we should just really improve really quickly is here, maybe we can add some text here. And the text will just be in the center of the screen at the bottom of our forms here. And we'll just say, don't have an account. We'll do an href equals to /signup. And then inside of here, we'll just say click here to sign up. And then we can hit save. And then what we can do is we can actually take this text and we'll drop it on the sign-in page. The sign-up page at the bottom as well. And we'll just say, already have an account? Go ahead and log in. Okay, so now this should be ready to go. So I'll meet you back on the web page and we can make sure that our login page works as expected. So here we are on our login page. So let me test the login. And we need to change this button. But the login does work, which is great. And then we can go back to log in again. And let's try the GitHub version. And that works as well. So great. So everything is ready to go with authentication. So now we need to actually move into Nhost's console and start creating all of our databases that we're going to use for this quiz. So I'll meet you back there where we can discuss exactly what we're going to do and how to use Nhost along with Hasura and Postgres to make an amazing tables with relationships, foreign keys, and using the authentication that we have to make sure the user can actually do what we want. So here we are in my Nhost dashboard under the Hasura tab. What I'm going to do is click to copy my admin secret. I just click that button and then I'm going to open the Hasura console. So when you click this button, it's going to ask you to add that secret. So go ahead, copy and paste and hit enter. So now we are in our most powerful part of the application. Here is where we can create all sorts of tables and queries and content. So under this data tab at the top, we're going to create a couple of tables, and these tables are going to have relationships as well as other pieces of the puzzle. So first, let's add a table, and this table is going to be a questions table. As you can see, there's already a users one, which tracks all of our users. So if I click this users button, you can see that there are my name, and here is an avatar URL, which is from GitHub and when it was created, and the ID. Now, what we want to do is to use this to our advantage. So we're going to create a new table here, and we're going to set the table name to questions. So inside this question table, we need the columns. So the columns that we're going to use is we're going to create an ID that's a UUID, a primary key, unique, and also randomly generated. Now that seems like a lot of things to type in here. So if you go to this frequently used columns, you can see that there's one here called UUID, default, genRandom UID, and primary key. So if you can just click that, it'll fill it all in for you. Then what you can do underneath this column is create one called question. That's going to be a type of text. And it's not going to have a default value. Then we're going to have a created at, and that's going to be a timestamp with time zone, and the default will be right now. So you can just type timestamp with time zone, and then in here we can do now. And then finally we need created by, and that's going to be a UUID. And it's not going to have anything in it right now, but we're going to use this to say our user is going to be this created by. So now we have that. We already have a primary key. And then what we need to do is hit add table here. And that will create the table. And then what we can do is create permissions. So if you look here right now, we only have admin as a role. So we need to add the user role. And then for the select method here, we're going to make some changes to our select here. So what we can do is say, with a custom check, we want to say created by, and then not equal, and then we're going to use this, the Hasura user ID. And if you just click this, it'll fill it in for us. And then that's it. And then we can hit save permissions. Now, one thing that we do need to make sure is that they can select anything in this column. So let's just say toggle all and hit save permissions again. So now we have our select done. We also need to be able to allow the user to insert a question. So we can do an insert here. And we can say insert without any checks. And then we want them to only be able to insert the created at and the question, because the ID and the created by are going to be automatically filled. Then we have the ability to do something called a column preset. Now this column preset basically says, hey, every time we do something, I want this to automatically be filled with something. So you can do created by, and then from session variable, and it's going to say Hasura column name. And all you have to do here is type user-id. And now that will always be filled in with whatever user is logged in at the time. And then you can go ahead and hit save. So now we have the ability to insert both the questions and also select them. But we only have the question text and not the answers. So now we need to create a second table that's going to be our questions and answers. So we can just say add table here. We're going to call this question answers. And then the column name is going to be the same as before. So we'll just do UUID, that's primary key, and randomly generated. Then we need the answer. We need this to be text. And then the default value will be nothing. And then we'll do an is correct. And this is correct is just going to be a Boolean. And the Boolean is basically going to say, is this correct? If so, we can set it to false or true. And then based upon that, we'll get our users the correct answer or the wrong answer. And then the question ID is going to be, again, a UUID. So you can just type UUID in. We already have a primary key here. And then what we want to do is make a foreign key. And the foreign key is going to be based upon the questions table that we just created. And it's going to be from the question ID to ID. So it's going to look just like this. And you're going to leave this as restrict, and then hit save. So at this point, this table is created once we hit add table. So now we need to also make some permissions changes here. So they should be able to insert something in here. And the way that this is going to work is the question answers permissions are going to be without any checks. So without custom check, They're only allowed to insert both the answer and is correct. And then we're going to have no presets. So then you can just hit save permissions and that will work. Now for our select, we're going to allow without any permissions, without any checks. They're allowed to select whatever they want. So we can just toggle all of these on and we can just hit save permissions. So now the users will be able to both insert questions and answers and get all of the questions and answers as they see fit. So now we need users' actual answers. So the users' answers are going to be something that they have finished the quiz or they've inserted a question and they've answered that question. They'll be able to look at them. So what we can do here is do users answers and then say at that point we're going to need an ID just like we did before. So we can just do UUID. We're going to need the user ID, which is another UUID. We're going to need the question ID, which again is going to be another UUID. And finally, the answer ID. And we can set that to UUID as well. So the primary key, again, is just going to be the ID. And then we need to add some foreign keys here. So we're going to add one first, and it's going to be into the questions answered. And we're going to do the answer ID to the ID and hit save. Then we're going to add another foreign key here and we're going to say the questions is going to be question ID set to ID. And then finally we need one more and that's going to be user ID from the users table and that's going to be the ID. And then you can hit save here and then we're going to do add table. So at this point, we have the user's answers, but we want to make a couple of changes to this also to make sure that we have the correct permissions as well as the way that it should work. So what we can do here is the user's answers in the relationship, in the permissions, under the user insert, that's where we're going to make a change. I'm going to say with custom check again, and we're going to say the user ID here is equal to the user ID here. So only a person who is inserting can use this so that the user IDs match, which means that if the question is only by them, only they can insert it. Then we need a question ID and answer ID. And then we need to do a column preset as well. And the column preset is going to be user ID from the session variable. And it's going to be this one. So we just do user-ID. And then we can hit save permissions. And that makes our insert all set. Then we can do a select here. And we can just say without any checks. And they can have all of our columns and hit save. So now we've basically created all of our relationships between the tables, but what we can do here is create a custom function using SQL that will then take this and make it a bit more robust by only letting the user select questions where the user ID doesn't match theirs. So what you can do using this raw SQL is create a function here that we can use in our application, and it basically becomes like a complex query. So what we're going to do here is do create or replace function public dot unanswered underscore question, where Hasura session is a JSON. Then underneath that, we're going to do returns set of questions. Language is SQL, stable, and then as $function, and then a $sign on the other side. And then underneath that, we're going to do select star from questions where ID not in, and then we're going to do another select statement that says select question underscore ID from users answers where user underscore ID equals Hasura session, and then you're going to do 2 arrows like this and say I want the X Hasura user ID, and then on the outside of this we want to cast it to UUID, so you can just do -2 colons and do UUID, and then underneath that you can do $_function like so, and that should give us the ability to create a function that we can use in our application where we don't have to do all of this. Essentially, all we can do is call this unanswered questions and it will give all of our questions back. So let's make sure that this works as corrected. So you should click this track this button, hit run, and what you'll see on the left hand side is a new function. And there we go. We have a new function here that now shows all of that. Now, we want to make sure that we add this session argument here, because what's going to happen is we actually need to pass in this session here. So what you can do is click edit and then just type in Hasura session and hit save. And what this gives us the ability to do now, instead of having to worry about writing a complex GraphQL query to do this for us, where we're passing the session as a UUID to get all of the user's answers, we just have this super powerful function that now runs, and we can just make that query and everything will just run as expected. So at this point, we've actually finished all of the setup in Hasura, ready to be able to use this GraphQL, which now has all of those different kinds of questions and answers, and also give us the ability to create some questions in our application. So what I'll do is I'll meet you back in the application where we can start creating our create question functionality that will allow a user to start adding questions to the quiz. Okay, so we're back in the code now and we need to add a few things. So first we actually need to create a new component here. I'm going to call this one PrivateRoute.js. And this is a way of us checking to make sure, one, the user is allowed to be logged in, and if they're not, they'll just end up going back to the login page. So essentially this is a way to see if the user is logged in or not. So all we need to do is just import useRouter from next/router, and then we need to import useAuth from, and that's going to come from Nhost React Auth, and we can say export function PrivateRoute, and then the component, and what we can do here is just say return, and then we can do a function here and say const router equals use router, and then const signed in equals use auth. And then what we can do is just check to see, are they signed in or are they not? And it's quite simple because of the way that this works. Instead of having to do anything complicated, all you need to do is type the word if and then say signed in equals null. So basically we're waiting to see if they've if this function has actually finished, and then we can just do one that says if not signed in So if they're not signed in, we'll just router.push and we'll force them back to the login page. And then we can just return and just say, we'll add a box here from ChakraUI that says redirecting. And that will just redirect them back to the login page. And then finally, we can just do, if they are logged in, we can just return the component plus the arguments. And that's how easy it is with Nhost to secure any pages that you might need. And then inside of this null, what we can just do is just do return text. And then we'll make sure we import text here. And you can just do this with a div if you just wanted 2 divs and just say checking authentication. In case it's really slow, right? So basically what we're doing here is saying if the sign in hasn't happened yet and we don't know whether or not they're signed in, we can just say, hey, we're just checking authentication. And then say if they are not signed in, we'll just push them back to the login page and we'll tell them redirecting. And while we're here, we'll just make this text too. That makes way more sense, and we'll just remove this box completely. And then finally, if they are signed in and we are good, we can just return the component that this is protected by. And that's it. It's as easy as that to protect any routes that you might need. So now what we need to do is actually create a quiz question. So what we can do here is create a new page, and we'll call this create.js. And we'll remove this API folder because we're no longer going to need it because we're not doing any direct page API work. So now what we can do is we can import the important pieces from React, and we'll also take use state while we're at it. And then we can import a bunch of different things. So on top of this import from React, we're also going to need some stuff from the Apollo client, and we're also going to need that private route we just did and the container. So let's import those. So we need to import use mutation. And if you've never used GraphQL before, don't worry, we'll cover it when we actually use this functionality. We're also going to need to import that private route. So you just do private route from, and we can use our fancy @ components, and then just private route, and then we can import the container as well. So we can just do container from container, and that should be everything that we need to make this work. Then we just need to import anything we need from ChakraUI. In this case, we're going to need an input, we're going to need a button, we're going to need the box, we're going to need heading. We'll have a radio button to select the correct answer, and we'll do a stack, and we'll have a center tag. So now we've imported everything. Now we can write our function here. And as you can see, I'm not doing an export default function, and this will all become clear in a second. So we're going to do create question, and then we're not going to pass anything in. And then at the bottom of our page, we're going to do export default private route, and then pass in this create question. Let's make sure I can spell the word default. So what happens is that this actually gets wrapped around this question and says, hey, check to make sure they're authenticated. If they're not, we should just kick them out and have them re-authenticate. So now what we can do is start creating our quiz questions. So we're going to create something called a const here, and we're going to call it question form. And then we're going to have a set question form, and we're going to set use state. And instead of doing anything like we normally would, we're going to use an object here, and we're going to have a couple different strings here. So we're going to have a question. Then we're going to have answer 1. We're going to have answer 2. We need answer 3. And then answer 4. So we're going to have the ability to have 4 answers to each question. Then we can just have one that says correct, and that'll also be a string. So now we have this use state. What we can do now is actually do the handling of both the input changes as well as returning some data. So what we want to happen here is we're going to do a handle input change. I'm going to set that to the event. Then the event here is that we're going to take a const and say target is the name and then the value. So what we're doing here is essentially taking the name and value from this event and saying we would like this as a constant to be an object, which we can take from event. So what you should get here is the name and the value. Then we can do set question form and say inside of here we're going to do a spreader. I'm going to take the question form that's already there, and then inside of a set of, we're going to do this. And essentially what this is going to do for us is make it really easy to handle input changes. So what's going to happen is, as the input is changed, the event is going to update this form here, and based upon the name, so it could be question, answer 2, 3, 4, or correct, it's going to put that value in there for us. So it's a super quick way of handling inputs. So now we have that part, we actually should just start making our quiz creation, question creation form. So what we're going to do here is use our container, and then inside of that we're going to create a box. And the box itself is going to have padding of 8. MX is going to be auto. We're going to set the width equal to 75%. And we'll have a box shadow here, because what we're going to create is sort of like a card looking object. And then we'll make it rounded, set to medium. And then inside of here, we can do a heading. And what we're going to do is actually we're going to reuse this container for our quiz too. So we can do an H1 here, and we'll just say text align to the center, and we'll put a margin at the bottom of 8. And the heading will just be create a new quiz question. And then underneath this heading, but inside of this box, what we can do is create the form now. So we just do form, and then we do on submit, and then we'll handle the submit, which we don't have right now, but we'll just create a function right now for that. So we'll just do a, at the top here, we'll just do a const, and we'll just do handle submit. And this is going to be an async, and we're going to take the event. And for now, we'll leave it like that. So now we have inside of this form, now we can actually create all of the things that we want. So inside of here, we're going to have an input. And this input is going to be type equal to text. And the name here is going to be question. And the placeholder will be enter your question. Then we can just do on change is equal to handle input change. And the value we can set it to is question form dot question. And then we'll just add a margin at the top here. And then before we get, we'll just explain exactly what's happening here. So what we're doing here is creating a new text question, new type of input called text that's going to be our question. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this handle input change to update the state for question. And as you can see by here, I've set the value to question, so it will always match that. And then I've also made sure that the name here also matches question. So now we have that part. What we can do now underneath this is create a stack that is inline, and we'll just set a margin of 2 and 4 here. And what we can do is create now a set of input, and the type will be text, and the name will be answer 1, and the placeholder will be enter your first answer. Then on change, we'll also use the handle input change, and the value for this one will be question form dot answer 1. So now we've created one. When we hit save, we can just copy and paste this 4 times. And then we can just make a couple changes to each one. So our first one is answer 1. This one will be answer 2, and we can just say second answer. And we can just update this to this value. This one will be the third. So let's go ahead and update that to third, fourth, and this will be answer 4. And then we just need to make sure this is answer 4. And we'll just make sure we didn't make any mistakes. And then we can hit save. So now we have those. What we need now is a radio button. And that radio button is going to handle which one of these is the correct one. And at the same time, we're going to update each of these to be a new option. So essentially the name on it will change based upon what someone enters in. So underneath your stack, you're going to create a center here with just a margin of 4 on the top. And we're going to add another stack here. And we're going to say spacing is equal to 0 or 4. And then we'll have a direction equal to row. And let's make sure we can spell the word spacing. Then inside of here, we're going to create a radio button. And this radio is going to have a name of correct. And on change, we're going to handle the input. So handle input change, just as we have with any other handle input. And the value is going to be equal to question form dot answer 1. So essentially this first one is going to be the answer 1, and that's how we're going to handle this. So I'm just going to hit save here so it neatens it up a little bit. And then we can say is checked equal to question form dot correct does not equal empty. So it will be checked if it's not empty, and question form dot correct is equal to question form dot answer 1. And that will give us if it's checked. So as long as these are true, then it will be the correct answer. Then what we can do in here is do a little bit of condition rendering just to make it look kind of nice. We can just say question form dot answer 1, or so this part is going to be true. So question form dot answer 1, and then if that's not true, we'll just say answer 1, and then we can hit save. So basically what we're doing here is we're going to make this update as somebody types in the answers based upon that. So as all good developers are, we can actually take this radio button now and just paste it So we have 4 and say, okay, this one is our second one. So we need to make sure that this answer 1 is now answer underscore 2. And then we can just take this and paste it here. Paste it here. Paste it here and change this to 2 and hit save. And then we can just do this for all of them. So I'm just going to speed this part up so you don't have to watch me copy and paste. And then we'll finish off with our create buttons. Okay, so now we have that. We just need the final pieces, which is the cancel button. That will redirect them back to the home page. And of course, the create button. So we can do a stack here and say is inline. We'll add a margin at the top so that we can have 2 and 4. And we'll do mx equals auto. And then we'll just have a button in here. And we'll add the color scheme similar to what we had before, where it's green. And then the width is 50%. And the type is submit. And that will handle the submission part. And we can just say create question. And then underneath that, we can just copy and paste this button. Set this to red. And then instead of a type, we can just say as a and say href equals slash and say cancel and hit save. So at this point, we've basically got a full form. So let's make sure this works by launching our application. So here we are in our application. So I opened an incognito window because I wanted to make sure that our private route works as expected. So I'm going to do here, I'm going to do slash and then create. And what should happen is it should redirect us back to the login page. And you can see that that works. So now we've tested that, I'm going to minimize the screen and we're going to test our inputs for our quiz. So here's our quiz. Create a new quiz question. Enter your quiz question. So let's enter who won the 1966 World Cup. Then in our first answer, we can just write the word England. And as you can see, as I typed in here, this below us gets updated. We'll do Brazil. And then we'll do, I don't know, Scotland. And we'll do Italy. So now we can select one of these. And as you can see, when we select them, it stays selected. And if we had a way to create this quiz, it would work if we click this button. So let's click cancel here and make sure it goes back to this page. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hop into our API Explorer and create our first GraphQL that will be able to use mutation to create our quiz questions. Okay, so we're back in our Hasura here, and we just need to do a couple of things to make this all work the way we expected. So if you go to the data section here, you see these here that say untracked foreign key relationships. These relationships inferred via foreign keys that are not exposed to the GraphQL API. So if you click this and then click OK, it will add all the relationships between all of these into our GraphQL. So now when we go to GraphQL, if we say do the, I don't know, we're going to do a mutation here. So we'll select mutation and click plus and then say insert questions 1. You can see now that we have the option down here on the left hand side of the questions underscore answers or users questions as well. So I've zoomed in a little bit more to make this a bit easier to read because it's on a plain white background. But what we're going to do is we're going to insert questions 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to select that we want to insert the question. And we're also going to insert the question answers. And the way that that's going to work is we're going to basically insert something here. Now right now it shows as data and this is an empty string, but we're actually going to use variables here. So what we can do is this my mutation, we can just call this create new question. And then we can set our variables above. So we can say $question is going to be a string. And then $question underscore answers is going to be question underscore answers underscore array rel insert input, which might sound really complicated, but I promise I'll explain what this is in a second. And then this is obviously just a straight string. So what we can do now is take these and say, I would like to use it here. And then I'd also like to use this right here. So we can just take this and basically replace all of that like this. And that should then take care of inserting the object. And then we just need one more of these. So let's just expand this out so you can see it a bit better. So basically what we're doing is saying, hey, we're going to insert a string here as the question, and then we're going to insert this crazy object here as the question answers. So what we need to do now is actually return something. So what we're going to do is, when we've done that, we're going to return the ID, and we're also going to return the question. We're going to do the created at, and we'll also do question answers answer. And that's it. So this is our first one, and we could have clicked all around over here to make it work, but I thought it would be easier to type this one out to show you that you can kind of do these things, and I'll explain how this works when we flip back to the code. So now we're ready to actually flip back to the code. Let's do that, and then we will copy this and paste it in, and I'll see you back in the code. Okay, so we're back in our code here, and the first thing we want to do is create a new file in our utils called api.js. Because then what we can do is just, instead of having these really long GraphQLs, we can just use a single constant to do this. So this first one we're going to do is create new question. And then the way that this works is you're going to do GQL and then a set of backticks and then paste in our original question here. And then we just need to make sure we import the GQL, and that's going to come from our Apollo client. And that's it. So now we have this, we can actually use this in our create question. So let's start by handling our submit event. So go back into your create question here and scroll all the way up to the top. And you see that we've imported this use mutation, but we haven't imported this new function. So you can just do import and then set curly braces and say create new question. And then we can do that from our utils/API. And let's just make sure that we spelt this all correctly. Looks good to me. All right, so now we can go to this create, and now we can start using the mutation. So what we can do is just above this handle submit, we can create a const here, and we'll call it create quiz, and that'll be the name. And we can do equals use mutation. And then inside of that, we can just do create new question. So now we have the ability to essentially call this at any point, and we can basically insert into the database. So the way that it works is it just makes this GraphQL query for us, and based upon the fact that we're using the Nhosts functionality inside of our app here, we'll already have the auth, and we'll already have this GraphQL endpoint. So essentially, we don't need to tell it where it's going to make any of these changes. It's just going to do it for us. So inside of our handle submit here, first we need to prevent default. And then we're going to make a try here. I'm going to say await. And then we're going to do create quiz. And then we're going to tell it all the variables that we want to pass down. So you just type the word variables. And then do a colon. And then make an object. And then this is where all of this data can go. So the question itself is going to be the question form dot question. And that one's fairly simple. Now before, you remember in the query itself, we wrote this crazy looking thing here. And that's because I want to be able to insert a data that is a object, and then inside of that object is an array of objects. So this is what this means. So basically we're doing an array that's going to insert each of them into the database as rows. So we can do question underscore answers here. And we want to make sure that this variable matches the name of our query. So question answers, question answers. So everything seems to match there. So we can just go ahead and say data. So each one of these objects is going to have the answer, and that's going to be our question form dot answer, and then whichever answer number this is. So this one is answer 1, and then is underscore correct is going to be the question form dot answer underscore 1 is equal to question form dot correct. And that's it. So each one of these is going to be like that. So what I'll do is I'll copy and paste these down so you don't have to watch me do it, and I'll change these for each one of the answers, and I'll meet you back once this is done. So the last thing we need to do is just catch if there's any errors here. So we'll just do catch error, and we'll do console.log error, and then we'll also do a return here that says alert and failed to add quiz question. And that's it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch this, and I'll meet you back in the application where we can test out and make sure this works correctly. Okay, so here we are in our question. Nothing has changed on the outside. So we'll just do the same question, and we'll do England, Germany, Brazil, and Scotland. There we go. And the answer is England. And now if we hit this create question, what should happen is this should successfully insert into the database. So let's go ahead and click that button. Well, nothing's really happening, but we can assume that there was no error message. So let's browse our data here and see how that works in our Hasura app. So here we are in the questions, and if we click run query, we can see that it was successfully inserted into the database. It shows who it was created by, what the question is, and then it has these two views here that you can click on, or we could just go to question answers, and we can see that England is true, so that worked as expected, and the question ID matches. So the last thing we really need to do is fix this so that when a user hits the create button, it clears out the state, and then we should be good to go in taking our quizzes. So we'll have to make some functions for that. So I'll meet you back in the code so we can fix this and try one more time. So we're back in the code, and just underneath our catch here, we're going to set question form, which if you remember correctly is this, which is up here with all of our different questions. And what we're going to do is we're going to set question form, and then we're going to set everything inside of here back to its original state. So we can just go up here and copy and paste all of that and drop it right in here and hit save. And that's it. Now what should happen is if we have a successful question, it should just clear that out for us. So let's go back to our application, test this out, and then we can move on to actually taking a quiz. So here we are back in the application, and what I did was I just deleted all of the questions out so that we could just reuse the 1966 World Cup, because it's the only other time England has ever done anything good with sports. So it's England, Brazil, we'll say Italy, and Germany. And we'll select. And what should happen now is that we click create question and it should clear out our quiz. And there we go. So now if we go back to our data in here and run the query, we can still see that everything works. Perfect. So now what we need to do is actually take a quiz. So what we're going to do is move on to creating a way to get all of the unanswered and also submit questions. So I'll meet you back in the code so we can create our quiz. Back in the code, and I've created a new page called quiz.js. So we're going to use this to house all of our quiz questions. So if there's 300 questions, they'll all be loaded in here. So we need to import a few things. We're going to import button and box, flex and text from our ChakraUI components. And then we're going to import our PrivateRoute because that's important. And that's coming from our component / PrivateRoute. We also need to create a few different things here. So we do need to use query. And that's a way for us to be able to get our questions from our GraphQL. And then we're going to use mutation for when we submit a question. And that's going to come from your Apollo client. On top of that, we're going to import our container. And that's going to come from component / container component. And then at that point, we can just create a function here called quiz. It's not going to take any parameters in. And then at the bottom, underneath this, we can do export, default, private, route, and then quiz. And hit save. So basically what we're going to do is the same sort of thing as we did for this create question. It's set from, obviously, in this version, the only thing that should be displayed on the screen is the ability to either take the quiz or they have finished the quiz. So we're going to need quite a bit of stuff here to make this work. So first, let's do a const here. And we're going to make a loading and data. And we're going to use query. And right now we don't have anything, so I'm just going to put a set of empty as a string. And then we're going to have the option to restart quiz. And that's also going to come as a mutation. So we'll just do use mutation and we'll put an empty string in here. We're also going to need a way to say what question we're on. So we need current index. And we'll set current index. And we'll set that equal to use state 0. Then we need the score, right? Because we want to know how well we did on the quiz. So we can do score, set score equals use state 0. Then we have the option to say show finished or set show finished. And we can set that equal to use state false. And based upon whether or not there are any questions left over, we'll show them that or not. So then we need a const here called reset quiz, which is going to be a function. So we'll do async and then set of arrows, and we'll just leave that for now. Then essentially at this point, we actually really need to have some data to really talk about how this is all going to work. So let's first talk about how we're going to get this unanswered questions. So if you remember, we made a function in our original GraphQL that essentially took SQL and made a crazy join. I mean, crazy is probably not the right word, but it made a join. It was quite complicated, but it makes it really easy on the other side. So what we can do is just do get unanswered questions, and then we can do GQL like so, and just say query unanswered questions. And we're not going to send anything down here because we don't need to. And then inside of here, we can do unanswered questions. We need the ID, we need the question, we need the question answers, and we need the ID answer is correct. So you can see how easy it is to make one of these compared to like if we had to join and do all that kind of stuff. It would look much more sort of like this where we're passing a lot of data in. Instead, all we're doing is literally saying, hey, we just want unanswered questions, and that's it. So now we have this unanswered questions. We can take this, copy it, and then import it at the top. So we can just do import, and that's going to come from util/API. So now we have the ability to get all the unanswered questions for the user. So the way this is going to work essentially is we're going to make a request using this query. So we can just change this to get unanswered questions. Then based upon what comes back from that, it depends on what we do next. So we can make an if statement here that says if it's loading, return text, and just say loading. And then underneath that, we can say if there's data and data dot unanswered question questions dot length is greater than 0. So we're essentially saying if it's greater than 0, we actually want to do something. Otherwise, what's the point, right? Because like if they don't, if they already have, if this is set to 0, they've already answered all the questions, or they're none available, and we should probably tell them to do something else. So now what we can do is say const deconstruct the unanswered questions. So deconstruct that by doing unanswered underscore questions. And then we can just say equals data. So basically what we're saying is the same thing as this, but just deconstructed so it's easier for us to handle. We can then say current question is equal to unanswered questions. And then pass in the current index. So what we're saying here is we expect the current question that you're on to be the unanswered questions current index. And we have the current index, and currently it's 0. So that would be the first question. Then what we need to do is do something if they select, essentially if they do something else, right? So like if they go to the next question, we need to be able to do something. So what we can do here is say const on next click. We can do the selected option that'll be passed in, and we can say const current answers equals current question. So the current question that we're on, which is here, we know that by this piece of data here. Dot question underscore answers. And this is just coming from the GraphQL itself. So if you look at this API right here, like here is the question answers that we're looking for. Then we can go back in and say something like, now we have the current answers, we can say const answer equals current answers dot find, and then we're gonna do a set of parentheses and say answers And then we're going to find if the answers.answer equals selected option. So essentially what we're saying here is, hey, find the set of answers. And if the answer's answer is the selected option, it's clearly true, else it's false. So then we can just do this. So if it finds the answer that we're using, we can say if the answer.is_correct, which again comes from the API, we can set the score equal to score plus 1. And then underneath that, we can say if the current index plus 1 is greater than unanswered questions dot length minus 1, set show finished to true, and then we can just return. And then finally underneath, set current index to current index plus 1. So that means that if this part isn't true, we'll increase this index here to this current index plus an additional 1. So at this point, we're sort of ready to sort of do our actual UI because we have a lot here. So what we can do is outside of this part, which is if the data, because the data itself is the most important thing, right? So we need to make sure we're inside of here because we need all of this data. So we can do a return here, and in here will be our return. And we can also do an else, another return here. That is for when we don't have any data slash, let's say, they've already answered all of the questions, right? So in here, we'll just throw in the container for now. And then in here, we'll put the container and we'll start working on the quiz. So what we can do is essentially have a box here that will be similar to the box we had before. So we can just do box equals P8. Box shadow is dark and large. Let's give it that pop feeling, and then rounded is medium. So now we have that. We can do a box, and inside of that box we can do show finished, and we can just say for now we'll just put question mark, and then we'll just put a div, but we're going to create a component here and we'll just say finished, and then else what we'll do is we'll create another box here, and then that box will be closed out. And in here is where we're going to do our questions. So for this, what we need to do really is actually create a component. And that question component is going to handle a bunch of different things. So we can do a new here and do question component.js. And we need to import a few different things, beginning with React. And we also need the use state here. And what we'll be able to do is pass in the properties that we're using and then basically pass some stuff back so that it works correctly. So we're going to use React. We're going to use mutation. And that's going to come from the Apollo client. And then we don't have the way to submit the answer yet, but that's what we're going to create in a minute. So we'll do function question. And what we're going to take in is the question and the on next click. And then we're going to do some stuff in here. So first, let's take this, go back to our quiz and say, okay, if this is done, what what should we do? So the way that this is going to work is we're going to pass in this question. So we can just do question. And the question is going to be a self-closing tag, and we'll just import this at the top here. So we'll just do it underneath here and say import question from our components, question component. And this question is essentially going to require us to pass some stuff in. So what we can pass in here is, of course, on next clicked is equal to on next clicked. We can also pass in the question, which would be the current question. And finally, we're going to need the key, so we can just do current question.id. And that's it. And now we can go in here and actually do the functionality that we need to make a question show up. So on top of this we're going to need to do some stuff that we need to track. So we need to know, is it answered? And we'll use state set to false. We'll need to track the selected option. And we'll set selected option. And we'll use state here, and we'll do an empty object. And then we need finally submit answer, which will use mutation, but we don't have anything here, so we'll just set this to an empty string right now. And then on option clicked, so that will be if they select an option, we should do something with that option. So we'll pass in an option, and then we'll just do nothing for now. And then we need another const here for submit question. And that's going to do something too. And then finally we can do some return. So the return is going to be a box here. And inside of that box, we should import these before we try and use them. So we're going to need to import box, button, flex, heading. That's going to come from ChakraUI. Okay, so we're going to use a box, and then we're going to have a heading here. And this heading is just going to say, as an H1, we're going to say, we'll also put the text aligned in the center. And the heading will be, how many can you get right? Which I think is a very valid question. Then underneath that, we're going to have a box. And then we're going to have a heading. And this heading is going to have a margin at the top of 8 to sort of spread out between the two. It's going to be an H6, so it's not really a heading. It's a very small heading. And we're going to align the text also in the center. And the question is going to be question.question. So that's what we're going to be passing in through our props here, and basically that is going to be the heading. Then underneath that we can do a flex, and then that flex is going to have flex direction equal to column, and then we're going to justify content equal to center. We want to flex shrink on the 1. And we'll have a margin at the top of 8, and we will wrap as needed. And let's just make that one of these so that it changes as needed. Okay, so inside of here is where we're actually going to return each of the questions, and we're going to map over them. So what we're going to do is open a set here and say question.question_answers.map. And then we're going to pass in the option and say return a button. And this button is going to be mx equals auto. Margin at the top of 4. Width is going to be equal to 50%. Min width we'll set to 150 pixels so that they're at least the right size. And the variant is equal to an outline. And then we need the key, which will be the option that we're passing in, .answer as. And then what we can do now is say on click, we'll do equals a set function and on option clicked option. And then we can close this out. And then if you look here, we've got this on option clicked right here, which is what we're going to fix and fill out with what we're going to do. And then this is just the option.answer. And then what we can do then is underneath this section here, under our flex, we can say answered and then in here we can just do a box empty equals 8, align it on the right hand side, and what we'll do here is we can have a button here, and this button is basically going to be our next button, so we can just do button. And what we need to do is do sort of a width of 25%. So it's a short button, and say on click equals submit question. And basically what we can do then is say, hey, when they click this button, submit the question, and we can submit it using our function here. So what we need to do now is actually handle the submission and the option clicked. So let's start with that. So this should be an async, which is why it's complaining and not the word answered. And what we need to do is essentially we need to create a GraphQL that submits this answer. So the way that the submission works is we're going to make a mutation that inserts the answers, and only one of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into our Hasura and show you how to do that. Okay, so we're back in our Hasura here, and I'm going to make another mutation. And the mutation here is going to be called submit question. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the $answer_ID, which is a UUID. And we're also going to pass in the $question ID, UUID. So what we're going to do is insert these two pieces into our database. So what we need to do is do insert, and what we need to do is insert users answers, but we don't want to do a full one. We only want to insert one. So what we can do, instead of using this, we can go over here, say insert users answers 1. So now we have that, and then all we need to do is do the object part. So the object part is quite easy for us. We just need the answer ID, question ID, and then we're going to return the ID. And it's that simple. And then all we need to do is replace these with our answer ID and question ID. Making sure we add the $sign so they know it's a variable. And that's it. So now we have this mutation that we can use to insert into our database. So I'll meet you back in the code where we can use this submit question to continue on. Okay, so we're back in the code and we're in our api.js file, and we're going to do an export const submit answer, and we're going to do equal to GQL, and we're going to paste in our insert. So now we have that. We can go back to our question component here and finish filling it out. So first we need to obviously import our new submit answer. So we can just do import submit answer from utils/API. And now we can use this to our advantage here. So let's just make sure we close everything out so it's happy, and we can take this and go over to our mutation here and replace it with submit answer. So now what we can do is actually work on how to submit our question. So what we need to do is do the submit question here, and obviously the on option clicked. So on the option clicked, we have the option. So we're going to try and await submit answer, which is what we called our mutation here, and say variables answer underscore ID option dot ID, and then question underscore ID is equal to question dot ID. And then once that's happened, so once we've awaited this, we can say set answered to true. We can set selected option to option dot answer. And then we can catch error and say console.log error, so that we have some sort of error handling if we need it. And then we need to submit the question, right? So once the submission has happened, we need to set the answered back to false. We need to set selected option back to just the object, and on next clicked selected option, and that's it. And if you're wondering what's going to happen here, basically we're telling the other side, so inside of our actual, like outside of the component but inside of our quiz, we had this option on next click, but we're not using it right now. But what we can do now is use that as a way to pass the data back and forth. So in our quiz, what this should be is ready to essentially be tested to a degree. First, we should fix our problem. It should be on next clicked, so that works. So what we need now, apart from this, is that we have our questions here, but we need to actually handle what happens once the user gets to the end, right? So they've answered all the questions in their quiz, and we're telling them that we're going to show the finished part, and we need to know what to do. So in this show finished part right at the top, we need to create basically a results. So we can create something called results, and we're going to give it a score, and we're going to equal that to the score, and then we're going to set the number of questions equal to unanswered questions dot length. And you're probably asking, what is this? We don't have this right now. Right, so we're going to create a results component over here. So do results component.js. And this results component is going to handle just the showing of a completed option. So in here, we're just going to do import box, comma, heading from @ChakraUI. And we're just going to do a really simple function here that says export function results score num of questions return box, and then in the heading here we can just have a margin on the bottom of 8, and we'll make this h1. And this h1 essentially just going to be us telling them that they have completed it, and these are the results. So we can just do results. And then underneath this heading, we're going to create a second heading. And this time just a smaller one at h3. We'll set the size equal to medium. And we'll also align this text in the center. And we'll say the results are in, you scored, score out of num of questions. And that's it. So now we basically got a way of showing the results based upon how many they answered. So now we have that part. One more key element here though is what happens if they want to give it basically another shot. So they want to try again. So what we can do here is underneath our part here and inside of our box, we can create something that also uses the show finished. And basically what we can do here is say show finished and then flex justify content equal to the center, empty equals 8. And then we just have a button here that says button width, we'll just set it to 50% and say variant is outline again. And say on click equal to reset quiz. And we haven't done the reset quiz yet, but that's okay. And we can just say try again. And then as the second part of this, we can actually just show them how many questions they have left. So they know exactly how many they have left. So we can just do another one here and say text aligned equals left. And we'll just say current index +1 / unanswered questions dot length. And then we have an extra period there that we don't need. Should be an underscore unanswered question dot length. And we need to close those like that and hit save. And basically that gives us the option now to essentially show them this reset quiz. Although we don't have a way to reset the quiz currently, although we have the restart quiz mutation, we don't actually have the mutation. So let's create a quick mutation here. And all we need to do this is do an export const restart score quiz equal to GQ. And then inside of it, we can just say mutation, restart quiz. And then we just say delete users answers where we pass nothing, and we return back affected rows. And I'm going to flip back to Hasura to show you why this works and how easy it is in this case. Okay, so we're back on our data side here, and if you look at these users' answers, the way that this works is that we have a permission here, but we don't have the delete, so we just need to add this in. But the way that this is going to work is it's just going to pull in the data from our Hasura session. So inside of this, under the user's answers, we're going to set a new permission here, and we're just going to say edit. And we're just going to say with custom check, and all we're going to do is set this to the user ID is equal to the user that is being passed around. And that's it. And now we can flip back into our regular stuff and make sure that we can actually take a quiz, delete a quiz, answer a quiz, and much more. Okay, so we're back in the code, and let's take this restart quiz here. And we can use this in our quiz.js as a way to restart the quiz through the mutation. So make sure that you import our quiz here. So we can just do restart quiz. And then what we can do is actually fill out the reset quiz functionality here. So what we're going to do is just say try, await, restart quiz with nothing, because we're not sending anything down, and we're going to set current index to 0, set show finish, which is this part right here. I'm going to set that back to false so that none of that shows. We'll set the score back to 0, and then we can catch an error if there is one and say console.log error, return alert error restarting quiz, we'll say. So now we have basically all of this done. There is one more piece that I'd like to add, and that's inside this else right here. What I want to do is create a no questions component. And what this will do is just be a simple component. So we'll just call this no question component.js. And what we're going to do is we're just going to import a few things from ChakraUI, and we'll import React. And what we're going to do is basically just tell them that, hey, we don't have any questions for you right now. Could you please add some questions for your friends? And hopefully your friends will add questions for you. Because the way that we have our code set up is they can't answer their own questions. So we need them to be able to have a no questions option. So in this return, all we're going to do here is say a box, add a heading as a H1, and we'll align the text in the center as we have before. And we're just going to say, sorry, we don't have any questions. And underneath that, we can just do a flex, and we'll do flex direction of column. And we'll justify content equal to center, empty equal to 8, and we'll do text, and we'll do text align equal to center as well. And then what we'll do is say click below to add questions for your friends. And then underneath this text, we can just do another flex container to hold our button and just say empty at the top of 8 We want to justify content into the center and say button width equal to 50%, and we'll make this an A, and we'll say href equals /create, and we'll say create. And then we can just go into our quiz here and just make this single change, which now should be a container. And then inside of that, we just need a box with p equal to 8. And we're just going to add the box shadow here too. Box shadow equals to dark, large, and rounded equal to MD. And then we can just do a box inside of that. And inside of that, we'll do no question, which VS Code is nice enough to import for us. And at this point, we should be ready to test our quiz. So what I'll do is I'll meet you back in the application and we can see how well it works. Okay, so here we are, and I've attempted to start the quiz by clicking the create quiz question. It says, sorry, we don't have any questions. Click below to add questions for your friends. So let's click that button, and that works fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly log out and create a bunch of questions, and we'll see how that works. Okay, so here we are in the quiz, and as you can see, it says, how many can you get right? Who won 1966 World Cup? 1 of 1, and here are our options. So I'm going to select England because I know that's the correct answer. I'm going to click next. It says, the results are in. You scored 1 out of 1, and then you can click try again, so we will. And we get the same question, it says 1 of 1, and let's try Brazil and click next. And it says the results in, the score 1 out of 0. So if we pop back over here and run the query, we can see that everything is working as expected. Here is my user's answer. You can see it was me, and you can actually see the answer here was Brazil, and the answer is indeed false. So we have one tiny thing that we need to just do, and then we'll be all set, and this whole quiz crash course using Nhost and Hasura and GraphQL will be complete. So I'll meet you back in the code. So I'm back in the code, and I do have one more thing that we need to do. So I'm inside of our container component here, and one thing we can't do is log out. So let's take care of that for the user. So I imported Auth in the beginning, but didn't actually do anything with it, and that's because I was getting ready to handle logout. So what we can do is just do handle logout, and then do a set of arrows here, and just say auth.logout, and we're going to set this to false. Now, if you don't set it to false, you set it to true, it will log out your user from every session that they have. And then all we need to do now is underneath our very last next link here where it says take quiz, we're just going to create a button and say on click equal to handle logout. And we'll just tell them, why don't you log out? And then we can go ahead and test this. So I'll just meet you back in the code for one more test before we end this crash course. Okay, I'm back in the code now. You can see that we have the ability to go to the home page, which doesn't really have anything. So maybe we should make a home page for the user. I realized that we had done all of this quiz work, but we haven't actually done something for having the user have a nice introduction. But I do want to show you that the login and logout works, and it brings you back to the login page. So now we have that, we should just finish with our index.js file and make it look nice so that when the user hits the home page, they have something to look at. Okay, so we are back in our index page, and we're going to import the container from here. And we will then also import the heading, text, button, stack, and box from ChakraUI React. And then we're going to import the use auth because I want to check to see if the user is logged in. And based upon that, we can display a couple different things. So this is going to come from Nhost React Auth. Then we can just do an export default function. Make sure you spell it correctly. And we'll just call this home. And we'll just say inside of here, const signed in from use auth. So we're just going to check if this is from used auth. So this needs to be an equals, not the word from. And we're just going to do a return here. And inside this return, we're going to return the container. And we're going to have a heading as an h1. And we're going to just say text align equal to center. I'm going to say welcome to our quiz. And then underneath that, we have a box. And that box is going to have an empty of 8. And inside of that, it's going to be mx equals auto. And then we're going to do text align center. And then say welcome to our quiz app. Welcome to our quiz app. To get started, click a button below and hit save. Then what we can do is underneath this text, we can just do conditional again. We can say if they're not signed in, we can just have them see a stack which has been justified, content to center, is in line, and the empty is 6. Then we can just say 2 different buttons, right? We'll have button 1. And then we'll just say sign up. And then we'll have a second button underneath that says login. And then we'll make this button here width of 25% and as an A. And the href is to sign up. And we can hit save there. And then for this one, we can just copy this and drop it right here and say this one goes to login. And then if they are signed in, so the opposite of this, so we can just say signed in. And then this conditional piece will just be another stack here. So in fact, we can just take this stack and we can just take this whole stack and buttons and we'll just change these from sign up to create or quiz, and then create a question, take a quiz, and hit save. And that's it. So let's go back into our application and see what that looks like, and then we should be all set. So we're back in our application, and as you can see, it says, welcome to our quiz app. To get started, click button below. So let's go ahead and log in. And then, as you can see now, we need to fix this, but it does now say create question or take quiz. So we can click create question and it redirects us back. So overall, we've created this complex quiz application with user authentication, and based upon whether the user is logged in, can see how to create a new question or take the quiz, and they can only see the questions they have not answered and belong to them. They can also restart the quiz and delete their entries from our database. So there we have it, guys. A complete quiz from start to finish using nhost.io. Now, if nhost.io does interest you, I'll leave a link in the description so you can find out how to sign up and start using their services. Until next time, see ya!